Hello, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Fire in the Head Productions and Red Sun role playing game and Savage Kingdoms role playing game. So that's pertinent because that's what this video today is about. So I thought I would do a quick video, well, relatively quick video about the differences between my two games, Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms. So Savage Kingdoms has been out for 12 years now. It's I'm working on a fourth edition. It's in play testing right now. But most likely, what will probably be published before the fourth edition of Savage Kingdoms is Red Sun, which is a D8 dice pool system, classic sword and sorcery, pulp sword and sorcery. Savage Kingdoms is sword and sorcery esque. Its slogan is Dark Ages fantasy role playing game. But anyway, I'm going to break down the two systems for what it's worth. So before I go on, just a disclaimer: both of these games are very minor. Savage Kingdoms has some minor notoriety, I guess, maybe, but it's still a very small indie game, which I'm proud of. But it's not like a giant. It's not Savage Worlds. Some people do confuse the two. In fact, I've actually got one or two players over the last years who were thinking it was Savage Worlds, and they got into Savage Kingdoms, and fortunately they liked it and hung around. So um, yeah, so it's pretty small. Red Sun's not even published yet. Like I said, it'll probably be my next project that I do publish by Mad Scribe Games, by the way, who will probably do the fourth edition as well. But right now, I'm mostly focusing on Red Sun. However, both of those are my games. I wanted to break down the differences between the two. So those of you who are my playtesters and players, if you're even watching this video at all, you already kind of know the differences. So this is for anybody curious out there, like, oh wow, this Mike Yao guy has these two games. What are the differences? All right, so first of all, there's 10 points of difference. It's probably technically more, but I wrote down 10 kind of major things. So the first thing we'll get into is the, I guess, more obvious. So let's go with the mechanical stuff. So Red Sun is a dice pool system. It's a D8 dice pool system to be specific. So it uses all D8s. It's the only dice that it uses. My MO as a game designer is I like to use a singular dice system. For example, Savage Kingdoms is D20 and Red Sun is D8. So I don't like using a bunch of other dice. I find it very confusing for new players. Like D&D has. D&D is great and all, but it does kind of get confusing with the dice types unless you're really used to it. So I just think it's more streamlined to keep dice systems more simplified. Right. Yeah. So Red Sun uses a D8 dice system, meaning that you can roll. So you would roll your trait plus any relevant modifiers for situation or condition, and then if you have talents that make you better at that skill, for example, say if you have a 3 in agility. I'm not going to go too much into this because I already made a video like in more detail about how the Red Sun mechanics work. But basically, you're rolling a die per, like, say, if you have a 3 agility, you're rolling 3d8 whenever you're doing an agility-based thing. You're trying to hit a target number, which is called a DR, or difficulty rating. Usually those are between 4 and 8, and you're just trying to see how many successes you get. In most cases, you succeed with one success, which is known as a marginal success. The reason it's called a marginal success is because the GM is free to describe like you barely made it, maybe some like minor, tiny little setback occurred, but not to be confused with a mishap. A mishap occurs when more over half the dice you roll for a given test is what it's called in Red Sun, um, is a one, and that's called a mishap. And yeah, and cool, weird, crazy stuff can happen, particularly in combat or spell casting or sorcery. So that's it, and you can roll up to 8d8. So 8 is the cap. So even if you've got 6 dice in a particular skill, and you catch your opponent off guard, say this is an attack, and that's like I think plus 2 additional dice, and then some other thing gives you plus 1 die. It's 8 is the max. So yeah, at the point where you get to 8 dice, I feel like you should be able to resolve yay or nay with 8 dice, right? Besides, we don't want too much dice going on. All right, so Savage Kingdom's dice system is a D20. It's an exploding D20, so it's very similar to D&D in the sense, or Pathfinder or whatever OSR games, where you're rolling the D20, you're adding a modifier. It's your attribute plus your skill level in most cases, and then of course there's occasionally modifiers for conditions and situation, just like in Red Sun and any other tabletop role-playing game. And if you roll a natural 20, it explodes, meaning you get to roll that die again, and you add that result to your total from the original first d20 roll. For example, say you're rolling a skill that you're +5 in, you roll a natural 20, that's a 25. You roll the die again, or you can choose to add +10 if you don't want to take the chance. So, and the reason that's important is because if you score 20 above the difficulty rating, because that's what it's also going to be called in Savage Kingdoms 4th edition, it used to be called a DL or difficulty level. That is a critical success if you score 20 above, and then extra cool stuff happens. But also, even if you don't roll 20 above and you're rolling, high numbers, that's good in combat because your damage goes off of it. So it's all a d20. For example, like attack and damage is off the same roll. So the higher you roll, so basically the more points, the more you score over your opponent's defense, that's the base damage up to the maximum damage of the weapon type you're using. And a couple of weapons, like the big heavy two-handed ones, have like armor piercing 2 or 3 sometimes. That's basically bonus damage. And there you go, done. And then armor subtracts. So yeah, before I move on, Savage Kingdoms also the new one. I'm bringing from 2nd edition. I'm bringing the imploding 1 rule back. So if you roll a natural 1, it implodes, meaning that you rolled a 1, so you're +4 in this skill or whatever. That's a 5 total, right? And then you pick up the die and you re-roll the die and the d20 and you subtract the result. So you rolled a 12. That's a -7. That is a critical failure. So a 0 or less is a critical failure. And it doesn't have to be from natural 1. I ran a game session last night at the time of this recording, and I think it was an NPC, fortunately, not a PC, but it was down to the NPC was injured and fatigued and all this like conditions that were -8, and I decided he was going to make a desperate attack anyway, and yeah, ended up even like for base 3 with +2 after all they had -8. Anyway, it was still a 0, and critically failed. And then interesting things can happen there. There's a chart you roll on for that as well. So moving on to point number 2. Point number 2. So Red Sun is Pulp, Sword and Sorcery. It is set in a Bronze to Iron Age. So in other words, it's just coming out of a Bronze Age into the Iron Age, and only a few cultures kind of know the secret of steel, right? So iron and steel, roughly is the same thing, but steel was invented when carbon was put in it. Occasionally, some cultures put metallurgists put extra components into to make steel as well. But the main thing is carbon, right? And so nobody's really figured that out. So if you've ever watched Conan the Barbarian, one of my favorite 1981 or 1982 films with Arnold Schwarzenegger, they talk about the riddle of steel. And in the movie it talks about like flesh is stronger than steel, and but that's only one of the themes. Another thing that's going on there, I think, is that it's the secret of steel. It's the enigma of steel, as it's called in Red Sun. In other words, meaning, do you know the secret of steel? Like iron weapons are great, but a steel weapon is even better. They're slightly more flexible, less likely to be destroyed, a little bit lighter, etc. All this magic stuff that carbon and occasionally other than ash, well, that's carbon, and other things that occasionally cultures kind of threw into the metallurgy with all the folding and stuff and made it tempered steel. But it's pulp, sword and sorcery in the sense of if you know what pulp means, it goes back to the old pulp magazines, such as Weird Tales and things mostly from the 30s and 40s. Robert E. Howard wrote a lot in the 50s. Robert E. Howard wrote, of course, his original Conan stories. Were most, if not all, most of them, I don't think all of them, but most of them were published by Weird Tales, right? And it was a pulp magazine. It was called that because the magazine was made out of was pulp, right? It literally was that. And most of the stories, because it was just kind of a magazine, were only like 15 pages, 17, maybe 20. Maybe you get 25, 30 pages if you were like a featured author. And so the stories often were very fast and had a lot of energy. Somebody once described Robert E. Howard as broadsword writing, which I thought was a really cool description. A critic about meaning that he could. It was just a swash of a broadsword, and it was just really cool and visceral. If you've read all those stories, you know what I'm talking about. I'm preaching to the choir here in this case, I'm sure. But so that's what it kind of means. Is pulp sword and sorcery is based more on like the short story format, where usually an adventure is done in like one sitting. And pulp and Red Sun is written to be kind of where it's usually a session or two. You finish up that adventure, or perhaps even mini campaign. You can run it as a full length campaign like Savage Kingdoms is more designed to do, and it's totally fine. But Red Sun probably works a little bit better in more the pulp sword and sorcery kind of sense. All right, so Savage Kingdoms on point number two is it's set more in the Dark Ages. So obviously it's not Earth, but it is Earth-like. In fact, there's a historical fantasy kind of slant to Savage Kingdoms. If you ever played, you know what I'm talking about. If you've seen the art, um, so I've set it in. I equate it to kind of like the Dark Ages of our history, right? Like so, the early Middle Ages, not long after the Roman legions have withdrawn from the British Isles, etc. That kind of period, right? That most historians call Dark Ages, although that's kind of falling out of favor. But I think we know what we mean by that. So, and it's set more into it's really kind of like late ancient world to early medieval, but the median there being kind of the Dark Ages, which is I love Dark Ages and antiquity and classic era. That's kind of my jam. Um, Very interesting to me, and I feel like there's a lot of mysticism and a lot of potential storytelling in those types of settings. Point number three, Red Sun has 4 attributes slash traits, meaning that it has agility, strength, mind, and spirit. This is like for your character. Um, Dungeons and Dragons calls them they call them ability scores. They've always been called ability scores. Some people just call them stats, which I always thought was silly because everything's a stat. Like hit points is a stat, right? Armor class is a statistic. So I don't know, whatever. But anyway, so a lot of people do just call them stats, but they really are ability scores. And so in Red Sun, they're called traits, and there's only 4 of them. Like I said, agility, strength, mind, and spirit. Savage Kingdoms, you have 6 attributes. So it follows more in the model of D&D. Doesn't use the exact terminology. In fact, I don't think any of it's the same terminology. I chose some kind of different terms. You've got agility, physique, vigor, intellect, magnetism, and willpower. And then you have other statistics that kind of derive from that, like your health and your stamina and your mobility, which is like your speed, your defense, and stuff like that. So Red Sun also has, going back to that really quick, also has very similar derived traits. It's a little more simple in Red Sun. You only have 1 defense trait, which I'm actually kind of lately been digging a little bit more. It's a little bit easier. But a lot of people do like the Savage Kingdoms version where you have a dodge defense and a parry defense. And technically there's even a third defense called shield defense, which is basically your parry defense adding a +2 or +3 modifier depending on the size of the shield that you're using if you have one. Whereas Red Sun is just agility plus, what was the formula? +3 is your base defense. Usually that is an average of 5. But a lot of characters, some, especially ones built more athletically, warrior type or thief type, might have a 6. And a shield gives you a +1 boost, so it's a 7. So it's a little bit more simple. You can have up to an 8. And then you have armor, just like in Savage Kingdoms, that can fiddle around with that as well. So let's move on to number 4. Number 4, Red Sun only has talents and not like Savage Kingdoms has talents and skills. And that's not necessarily makes it worse. In fact, it actually makes it easier. So in Red Sun, whenever you, and this is the new rule I literally just wrote in the last playtest like a week and a half ago. I've decided that you can spend experience points after every session, which I think is kind of cool. Meaning that so if you earn 1 experience point per hour of gameplay, just like Savage Games, the same system. I really like that system, so I've kept it that way. You might get a bonus point from the GM or like a secret vote from the group at the end. So let's say a 4-hour session, just probably pretty average. You would earn 4 experience points, maybe 5 if you're fortunate. And you could immediately spend that on a talent if you want, as long as it's a talent that doesn't have an asterisk next to it, meaning that that is a talent that requires downtime. Like it takes a little more training. The other talents, which are the vast majority, like 90% of them, you can totally, if you've got the points, you can totally get it. You can buy it. And those are talents that make sense. They're kind of things that you would just kind of learn on the way. Like say you have spear adept as a talent. You're adept with a spear. A spear runs off of agility or strength. So let's just say you have a 2 in it, but spear adept makes it 3 dice when you attack with a spear. But now you got enough points to get spear expert, which I think costs 10 points. So I think spear adept is 5. And so each talent in the chain kind of doubles itself. So now you have 4 dice whenever you are attacking with a spear, which is obviously good. So yeah, so any talent that's like that, that's easy, that you can easily like imagine that you learn during your adventures and travels, you can pick up immediately if you want, or you can pull the points. Like say you're saving up for an expensive talent. For example, a good example is one of the sorcery initiate talents. You say you want to be a fire mage initiate. You want to dabble in fire sorcery, fire magic. That is 10 points. So you're not going to get that in one session unless you're playing like a really, really long time, which that sounds amazing. Like the old days. And then so otherwise, unless you'll save up for that, right? And if you want to progress in sorcery, the next level of that, fire mage, what did I say it was? Fire mage in this example? Initiate. The next one is Fire Mage Adept. That's 20 points to get that. So you're definitely gonna have to be saving up for that. And then if you continue in Fire Sorcery, the next one is 80 points, etc. So yeah, and then every 50 XP you earn in Red Sun is a +1 to a trait. So after every 50 you earn, you can increase your agility, strength, mind, or spirit by 1, which is a pretty big boost. That's the equivalent, as far as I can tell, mathematically, in Savage Kingdoms and D&D is like a plus 2.5. Might be closer to 3. So imagine boosting an ability score by 2 or almost 3 points. That's kind of a big to do. Or actually, a modifier too, not just the number if we're speaking D&D. Savage Kingdoms doesn't have the number, like it's all modifiers. All right, so and then every 50 XP in Red Sun, you earn +1 renown as well. Renown's kind of a cool thing if you're a part of a secret order or a priesthood, some kind of like organization or order. Renown is kind of the governing factor to allow you to progress through the ranks of that. So in other words, the more you're known you are, the more you can advance within those things. Everybody starts with renown of 0, except for if you have the highborn talent, you can start with a renown of 1. So, right. Going over to Savage Kingdoms. So Savage Kingdoms is a little bit more traditional. There's an experience point table. The first advancement is 10 XP, the next one is 22, then it's 36, and then it's 52, and then 70, and then 90, etc. That's how the mathematical pattern goes. And so at each of those points, like some games would call it a level. The only time we use the word level in Savage Kingdoms technically is skill level. So these actually technically the experience point thing is called advancement. And say, for example, you earn 10 XP, and you started at 0 advancement, or first advancement, and you earn 5 skill points and 5 talent points. So Red Sun, again, only had to worry about talents because talents equal skills, so to speak. It's a little more simplified and a little sleeker. I would be kind of honest there. Savage Kingdoms has you gain 5 talent points and 5 skill points. So skill points turn into a skill level. So if you want to put a point in performance or a level, that becomes a skill level, right? You want to put a point in range weaponry, that becomes a skill level. There is a chart though, like there is a maximum level per advancement. So in other words, you can't dump 10 points into one skill at 0 advancement. It would make no sense that you're a beginning adventurer and you're a master swordsman. So like, doesn't make any sense. So not only is it for game balance, obviously, but it's the real reason, but also storytelling wise, it's kind of dumb. So there is like a governing factor for that. And then talents, you can with 5 experience points in Savage Kingdoms, that's usually enough to buy. It's enough to buy one like really really good big talent, but you can actually get 2 in many cases. And if it's lesser talents, it only costs 3 points, and it's from your favored list for your race or calling, that you might actually be able to get 3 talents in like 1 advancement. But I would say the average is 1.5 to maybe 2. Right. And then every other advancement is +1 to your renown, and every advancement you get +1 to luck as well. So that's the Savage Kingdom's way of doing it. As you can see, it's a little more complex, but some people like it better. Some people like the Red Sun version better. They're both, I think, pretty decent. So, all right, point number 5. Red Sun has complications, and Savage Kingdoms has weaknesses. So it's just a different name. Complications are just like almost exactly. In fact, most of them are exactly the same. 90% of them as the weaknesses in Savage Kingdoms. And these are the things that you take part of your character. Like for example, you're oath bound to a king, or you have this obsession with ale or wine or something. You're a bit of a drunkard, or you have a phobia of sorcery or phobia of demons or deep water or something like that. You can also be maimed or be be zealous, overly zealous about a god or faith or religion or cult or something. Those are called complications in Red Sun, and they give you bonus points at character creation. So that's the mechanical benefit from them. But by far the more interesting benefit is that it makes your character much more realistic and believable. Um, Nobody likes a hero without flaws. Those are just ridiculous because you can't connect to them, right? They don't resonate. In Savage Kingdoms, all this stuff is called weaknesses. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. You can only start with as many as 5 points worth on either game system. And also in both game systems, you can earn complications or weaknesses in play. I know recently in Savage Kingdom, there's been one of the player characters over those last few sessions has earned two weaknesses in play. So if you earn it in game and play, like you do not get the bonus points for it. So yeah, because you would just probably be coveting the weaknesses for no reason, right? All right, point number 6. In Red Sun, there are no elves or dwarves. And Savage Kingdoms, they kind of are. They're called the She and the Duergar. So Red Sun has no dwarves or elves, and that's mostly because in classic Sword and Sorcery, you don't really see this is because elves and dwarves are typically high fantasy, right? It's a totally different subgenre of fantasy. And so I don't really have them in Red Sun because I don't feel like they fit. And then in the lore of the setting, and real quick, I mean, I should have said this at the beginning of the video. Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms take place in the same world, the same world sphere, the same planet, if you will, named Torion, which the name of the planet is actually revealed in Red Sun, and Savage Kingdoms nobody really seemed to know about it. So, in other words, it's lost over time. So, Red Sun is basically 2,500 years before the Savage Kingdoms default timeline. So again, one's a Bronze to Iron Age kind of era, and one is a Dark Ages, pretty well into Iron Age at that point. So yeah, it's the same planet. The planet has a red giant for a sun, which is why the Red Sun game is called that. It's also called that because it's indicative of Red Sonja or Red Sun Rising in Viking culture, meaning blood will be spilled. Um, so yeah, it's that name is there for a couple of reasons actually, and it also kind of reminds people of Dark Sun, which is like by far my favorite D&D setting. It's the desert kind of. It's a sword and sorcery setting, but a little bit of a twist to it, which is really cool. So yeah, no elves or dwarves. Technically, there is a race. It's an offshoot of humans, almost like a Neanderthal sort of race, known as the Duergar, that are just people have just kind of heard of. They live deep in the earth. You know where I'm going with this, right? Like dwarves. Um, in Red Sun, but then later on, 2,500 years in Savage Kingdoms, they're more known. There's actually like Duergar kingdoms, and they become more like the dwarves we know of like D&D and D and high fantasy, and less like an offshoot of humans. So in other words, what happened in the evolution for 2,500 years is that they almost really became kind of their own race, right? And incapable of like crossbreeding with humans and stuff. But anyway, and then the elves in Savage Kingdoms, the elves are called the She. I have the Aluna She, which are basically light elves. You might even could say high elves. The Dark She, like dark elves. Not exactly the same, but it's a rough same idea. And then the Wild She, which are kind of like wood elves if it were D&D. Again, similar but not exactly the same. And if you recognize the term She, that is from Celtic mythology, spelled Sidhe. It's Gaelic, but so it's pronounced She. And then Duergar literally is a Nordic term for dwarves. Point number 7: spend experience points as you earned it. I feel like I already mentioned that. I did. So I don't know why I mentioned it earlier, but here we are. Here's the official time I'm supposed to be talking about it. So yeah, you can spend experience points at Red Sun as you earn it, or you can save them up whenever you want to. In other words, there's no point you have to get to on an advancement table to do so. Although in the original playtest versions, it was that way. So, but now I've kind of laxed up on it, and I'm going to playtest it and see if it's cool. I think it's going to be fine. Whereas Savage Kingdoms, you have to spend at certain advancement levels, which I talked about already. So we'll move on to point number 8 in that case. Point number 8, actually. Monsters and beasts. So these are demons, giant animals, dinosaurs, and Red Sun mostly. If you're a big fan of sword and sorcery, demons are kind of a thing, and there's kind of a broad term, and this is true in like real ancient world history and many cultures. The term demon really kind of means almost anything. It's not necessarily a creature from the hells or another dimension, although that's often the case. And especially when you take it to a folklore level with the commoners, they don't know the difference between necessarily a demon and a gorgon and or even a fey creature or something like that. It's just this weird, horrible thing that's not an animal that they've hunted and so it's probably a demon. And then you have giant animals are like a big thing in Sword and Sorcery. I even have dinosaurs. They're not called that, but they are kind of like a primitive form of dragons. I do have true dragons, by the way, as well, but they're pretty rare, even rare in Savage Kingdoms. But there's like lesser forms of dragons that are more like giant lizards, and they are basically dinosaurs in the game, but they're not called that. And I'm certainly not using the actual dinosaur terms for them. Like, yeah, so cool, fun. And saber-toothed tigers and mammoths and stuff like that exist in both settings, but they're far more common in Red Sun than they would be in Savage Kingdoms. Savage Kingdoms monsters are more like so you have Fae, like so Fae isn't really a thing yet in Red Sun because there's the two worlds, right? There's the Earth world and the cosmology of Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms. Supposedly, when the world was created by the gods, it kind of shattered apart, and there was the other world and the Earth world, and they sometimes run into crossover, often at like solstices and equinoxes, but also other times. And powerful sorceries sometimes can open gates. And the other world is comprised of the Shadow World, which is where the Fae come from. This is more of a Savage Kingdoms thing. And then the darker, lower recesses of that world is considered the Nether World or the Hell World. And then rarer still is the Overworld, which is more of a glorious place in the high mountains, and it's kind of where many of the gods supposedly live, if they even exist. Because going back to Sword and Sorcery for Red Sun, one of the cool things about the Conan world and a lot of Sword and Sorcery in general is that there are obviously mystical creatures and but divine happenings that are especially that are prayed for, like anything that's an obvious thing to do with gods is very much in question, which is cool. I find that more interesting because the thing with Sword and Sorcery, it's more about the hero. It's more about man against the darkness, or woman against the dark, humans against the darkness, and against the unknown. And that's why it's very human centric. And different races, things are usually the creatures and the NPCs, right? So I do in Red Sun have options to play non-humans. Most of the races are the same non-human options in Savage Kingdoms, meaning that historically they survived into the later ages, except for one race. I think that's the Tinku. You don't see them in Red Sun. So, well, actually, so the opposite. They didn't. It's not like they survived. They didn't appear until later on. Kind of like the she and the Duergar. So, but anyway, Savage Kingdoms monsters are going to be like you still got your gorgons and your demons and your giant animals, but you don't. There's no the dinosaur, the lesser dragons left. They're just like the real dragons and dragon-like things like wyverns and basilisks and stuff like that, like that sort of thing. I mentioned the word gorgon, so people will like probably if you're wondering like, oh, cool, gorgon's its own category, so Medusa is like its own thing. So in Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms, and if you play the games, you know what I mean. Gorgon's its own category. So in my setting, it is these both of these settings. It is a term creature to explain mutated creatures, typically part man, part human, and part other creatures, such as a manticore, a manticora, as they're called, or a minotaur. Um, Medusa itself. So they're Medusae, or they're like a is kind of a race, not really a race. They can't reproduce, but there are multiple ones instead of just the one, right? So yeah, so Gorgon is a race, and there's a whole reason in the setting. There was a the gods of Rodon, which are kind of like the ancient Greek kind of culture in the setting. They were like there was a he was called the stillborn god, this god Gorgothon. So when he was born on the Isle of Rodon, the Isle of the Gods, he was born stillborn, and legend has it that Pridonis and his wife, which some people believe is Romega and others people believe was Sardona. They threw him into the sea, thinking that he was, just he was dead, and he washed ashore on a place called Gorgotha. This like, and it's in the map. You can go there in the game if you want to. I don't know if you want to. Mountainous, kind of horrible area. It's not arable at all. Humans don't really live there, not only because it's not arable and farmable. It's just a horrible place. There's volcanoes and gorgons spawn there. So Gorgothon supposedly washed ashore, and various forms of the legend in the setting, like some say a demon came upon him and nursed him back to life. Others say he just gathered, he came back to life himself, being of God blood, divine blood, And anyway, eventually he tampered with all these creatures and mutated them, and they became Gorgons. So there you go. Moving on to point number nine. Number nine, the art style of Red Sun. These are art styles for Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms. So starting with Red Sun, the art style is very Frank Frazetta. By far, probably my favorite artist of the past. I love the brothers Hildebrandt as well, but they're not quite as dark and gritty, although they have some really cool stuff. So the art style is very Frank Frazetta versus heavy metal, and this is the style not only in my head, but this is some of the art, some of the placement art that I'm using, like placeholder art in the playtest rules. Is painting that picture, I hope, to the publisher when they get a hold of it. So yeah, so that's what's in my head. It's very Frank Frazetta meets heavy metal, Boris Vallejo. Yeah, that really cool kind of stuff. Whereas Savage Kingdoms also is a cool art style. It's very historical fantasy slash dark fantasy. So it's like a little bit of gothic fantasy, especially in the kingdom of Molovia, that's right. And then there's a bit of a historical fantasy. So the art that I use, I couldn't afford much in the actual books, but a lot of the art I use nowadays, like when I send players like a picture of their character, they will notice that it looks very realistic. It's very historical fantasy is the art style of Savage Kingdoms. Right. Okay, the final point is point number 10, the differences between Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms. Player type. This is player type. So Red Sun. So first of all, the player types between Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms mostly are going to be the same, right? And the same with any tabletop Dungeons and Dragons. But I want to break down like what the subtypes might be, or what players might prefer in either setting. So Red Sun is looking at it's pulp, like I said. So fans of like pulp or classic sword and sorcery, particularly like 70s and 80s kind of style sword and sorcery. Also, comic books. I'm weirdly enough not really a comic book person. And when I say comic books, I mean more like graphic novels, such as the Dark Horse Conan ones are amazing. It's a little grittier and I guess kind of more adult or ish or whatever. Or fans of Conan the Barbarian, regardless, or Conan the Cimmerian, and then also dice goblins. And the reason I put that down is because dice goblins are like a lot of us. We like to collect dice and roll a lot of dice and stuff like that. So Red Sun uses multiple dice, and that might be kind of fun for dice goblin type people. Whereas Savage Kingdoms just uses a single D20, which is cool. Everybody loves D20s, right? But it's just the one die that you're using. So going into Savage Kingdoms, the player types would be more like people that are in the dark fantasy, gothic fantasy, people that are more into history. Although I think Red Sun also works for that, particularly like way back Neolithic history and Bronze Age, and also like fans of The Witcher. The Witcher is very Savage Kingdoms esque, and that was yeah. So cool. Anyway, that's it. So that was the 10 things between Red Sun and Savages, or Savages, Red Sun and Savage Kingdoms, the differences between the two. 10 points. I'm sure there's a few other minor points, but that's all like kind of the major stuff between the two things. And yeah, check out those two games if you get a chance. Red Sun hopefully will be come out in the next couple of months. I say hopefully because Mascribe Games is pretty like is doing good work, pretty popular, and it's really just like two people in that company. Maybe there's a third. It's really just one of the main guys, an old friend of mine, Chris. But he's got, I think his wife is also works, and there might be a third person. But anyway, so point is, small group doing awesome stuff, but probably like backlogged a little bit with projects. Um, so yeah, so hopefully that's coming out soon, and then Savage Kingdoms Fourth Edition will probably be the next release, and that might be later in the year, or maybe early next year as well. I want to see. I don't want to crowd the two together too much, and just see how Red Sun does. Yeah, so check out both games. Check out Savage Kingdoms on Drive Through RPG. This is where they will be for sale, by the way, and obviously I might order some stock books to put in local bookstores as well. Maybe even go to Amazon again. They carry the first edition of Savage Kingdoms, by the way. So Savage Kingdoms and Red Sun right there. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you stayed to the end, and this has made you wiser between the two games, if you even care. If you do, thank you very much. And like, subscribe, and comment, and all that stuff. All right. Talk to you all again soon.